Thank you. Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this very important debate, and I have to say it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Bristol North West. Mr. Speaker, like other honourable members here tonight, I am very concerned about the government's proposals and the serious implications for our country and indeed the local community in my constituency of Reading East. In my view, the negotiations have produced what is quite simply a deeply flawed draft agreement, and I'm very concerned about how our relationship with other European countries could develop in the future. I firmly believe that the proposals are against the national interest and that they could damage our economy and also could harm local communities across this country. Mr. Speaker, a number of other members have made some clear and indeed telling points this afternoon about the weakness of the UK's position should these proposals be agreed. I would like to associate myself with the speech by my right honourable friend, the member for Hackney, and also to commend the speech of the member for East Surrey and my right honourable friend for Gedling. I do not accept the government's assertion that we either have to accept the proposed deal or have no deal, and I am pressing for a much closer and much more sensible relationship with the EU. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom would quite simply be in a dreadful position if we were to sign up to the government's Brexit deal. And yet the government is still trying to foist this deal on our country. Mr. Speaker, that cannot be right, and that is why I will be voting against the deal, and I would urge other members here tonight to do the same. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to the substance of today's debate. I want to speak about the very serious impact of the government's proposals on my constituency of Reading East, and with regard in particular to the issue of immigration. Families are suffering very real stress and hardship because of government policy. Thousands of local residents are from the EU, and many families in our area include both British and EU citizens. Imagine the worry and stress that those families have suffered during the last 2 years, and also consider what they are suffering now. The government's failed negotiation and the lack of a plan for the future has led to families facing enormous uncertainty. Ministers have refused to accept Labour's alternative, which would offer clarity and certainty to both EU residents in the UK and indeed to British citizens in Europe, who are sometimes forgotten. Mr. Speaker, businesses and public services also need that clarity and certainty, and they, I believe, have been very badly let down by the government. My constituents in Reading and Woodley are at risk of being badly affected by a shortage of skilled workers caused by the failure of this government's policies. The risk to our NHS in particular is clear. GPs, our hospital and other services are already under severe pressure. They face increased demand from a growing and ageing population, insufficient funding and the additional problems of high housing costs, making it harder for medical staff to afford to live in our area. In addition, our local NHS is particularly vulnerable to the loss of staff from the EU, as a large number of EU citizens work in the local health service. EU staff make up just 5% of the NHS's total workforce. However, the proportion is much higher in my constituency. As many as 12.8% of the employees at the Royal Berkshire Hospital are from the EU. That is 2.5 times the proportion in the NHS as a whole. And, Mr. Speaker, this deal also risks inflicting serious damage on our local economy. Reading, as many may know, is home to a number of IT and telecoms businesses. These international firms are major employers which create a significant benefit to our local economy and indeed to the wider area across the south of England and West London. Many have their Europe, Middle East and Africa head offices in the Thames Valley, and they are there in part because of the access to the EU and the wider pool of skilled staff. Many of these businesses hire skilled staff from the EU precisely because the two-tier visa system for non-EU staff is too expensive and too complicated to navigate. And there are very real concerns that if they cannot bring teams together quickly due to immigration rules or cannot move staff immediately due to visa requirements, that there is a risk, a very serious risk, that business could move away from the UK. Reading is also home to a number of tech startups. These are small and medium-sized enterprises which drive innovation and add immense value to our local and indeed the national economy. Many such small firms are run or started by people from the EU as well as UK nationals, and they may well have come to our area precisely because of that international outlook. They contribute their knowledge, entrepreneurship and hard work. They are also, Mr. Speaker, deeply concerned about the uncertainty over Brexit, which exposes their business to significant and unnecessary risk. And yet, despite all this evidence from my area and across the country, the government has quite simply failed to set out sensible plans for immigration. Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary told the Home Affairs Committee that the White Paper on immigration would be published in December, and we heard honourable members remarking earlier today, which December? He now says it will be published soon, and it's unlikely that members will see it before the meaningful vote next week. And the political declaration includes less than a page on the future migration policy. It commits the government to ending free movement, but it fails to include a plan for what will replace it. Mr. Speaker, the government has quite simply failed to deliver on its promises on immigration. It's failed on immigration just as it's failed to deliver a Brexit deal that protects jobs, workplace rights and frictionless trade for UK businesses. Mr. Speaker, this simply is not acceptable. Members across the House have a right to know what the new immigration system would look like before we cast our votes next week. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, I've never accepted there is a choice between Theresa May's failed deal, the Prime Minister's failed deal, and no deal. No government has the right to plunge this country into chaos as a result of its own failure.
Hear, hear.